Good to hear. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Hutchinson.
Mr. Administrator, as I mentioned, I know, I'm just waiting for I'm going to ask you a question, you're not going to answer it, and we're going to be where we are, and we're going to settle this one-on-one. I know. But I'll just ask.
Senator.
I'll try my best. I talked about, and you acknowledged, that we set 3 priority goals, and you fully funded 1. You have now gone 100% over on 1 and cut the 3rd priority by virtually the same amount that you went over on the 2nd priority. So you can imagine why we would think that you are cutting the Orion and the SLS in favor of commercial crew. What I would hope is that we could come to the joint goals and all work together for commercial crew, but not at the expense of Orion and SLS. One thing that you mentioned, you're funding at a 21% increase this year, is technology. Why is it that you feel so compelled to cut the future, which is SLS and Orion, in favor of the immediate, which is commercial crew, as we acknowledge? Why not keep the 3 priorities, keep the faith with Congress, and help us feel like we're all going in the same direction?
Senator, I do believe that we are doing our best to keep faith with Congress. When we agreed upon the 3 priorities, we said we were going to fund SLS and MPCV, and we were going to comply with a schedule that we had laid out for everyone. I provided a list to the committee of achievements with both SLS and MPCV to date. Some of them are well ahead of where we expected to be. So while I know you're talking about dollars, I'm actually talking about accomplishments, getting us to a 2014 launch date for Orion that Lockheed Martin wants to do an exploration test flight. They're going to make that. So 2 years from now, we're going to fly Orion. That was not even in our program before. 2017, I think, at the rate we're going right now and the funding profile that we have, while not optimal, will get us to a 2017 first uncrewed flight of SLS and MPCV combination. That will be a first generation SLS MPCV. And then no later than 2021, we will see a crewed mission on SLS MPCV. Additional funds would help the 2021 date because we could pull some things forward, we could reduce some risk, but it won't affect the 2017 launch date, the first uncrewed mission. So I think we have put funds against SLS and MPCV to get to to meet the objectives that we agreed to with the Congress. While commercial crew and cargo is not a priority, so to speak, it is not one of the priorities agreed upon by the Congress and the administration because there are only 3. But commercial crew and cargo are vital for me to be able to live up to my promise to you on the International Space Station. Without an American capability to supply both cargo and crew to the International Space Station, the gap is going to continue to increase. I am going to continue to rely on the Russians to provide transportation for both cargo and crew, and I'm not sure that I can adequately enhance the International Space Station the way I want to do it.
Mr. Bolden, when you thoroughly studied Orion and SLS, you studied it in NASA, and then you studied it outside of NASA. And you had an outside group that you were adamant had to make the final decision, and you paid a lot of money for that further independent study. And probably what I would consider to be a year late, you finally got the report back that said, if the assumptions are correct for the next 3 to 5 years, the budget will be sufficient to make the goals for Orion and SLS a reality. And yet, the very next year, we have you coming forward cutting that budget that was the basis of your very sought after and required outside audit study before you would move forward. So here we are in what looks like the stepping back from what your outside study showed was necessary, so that you're going to be able to come in next year and say, gee, you know, we didn't get that funding that was the basis of that study, and so we probably can't do Orion and SLS, which is what the kind of rhetoric we have heard in the past. So I just wonder why you would be so obvious in cutting the Orion and SLS budget when you staked the whole credibility of going forward on the study that said we had to keep these assumed levels of spending.
Senator, it is my hope that before you leave the Congress, I will be able, NASA, will be able to show you where it's not going to cost us as much as is presently budgeted right now to complete SLS and MPCV, because the technologies that we're developing will reduce the costs, that we will move to lighter weight tanks. We will move to composite tanks. The original estimates we gave everybody were based on current state-of-the-art technology of the day. If we stay with that, then I'm not being responsible. So my hope is, and we have to live within the budget that you gave us, and that budget also has to provide funds for a wedge for additional things that will go with SLS and MPCV to make it a true exploration system. So, you know, that money has to come from within. So we are trying our best, as Senator Shelby mentioned, as Senator Cochran has mentioned, and as all of you have, we're trying to call upon our best technologists, both in the agency and academia and in industry, to help us get to the point where we are much more efficient in the development of our vehicles, that they are much better than the currently envisioned, and that we can get the job done that you said.
Mr. Bolden,
we will not change the date.
You are so insistent that you're living within the budget that we gave you for Orion and SLS. But oddly, you're going $300 million over the authorized level for commercial. And you're saying on Orion and the SLS, you're going to have new technology that's going to bring the cost down, so everything's going to be fine. But on the other hand, you now are looking at 3 or 4 companies that you're subsidizing on the commercial crew side. So there doesn't appear to be any kind of future advantage for technology like you're proposing that you're going to have in the Orion and SLS. It doesn't seem to have any sense that there's a way forward that you can meet all of our goals with integrity by subsidizing competitive commercial crew enterprises, but maybe not 4. And
Senator, I have to reemphasize the fact that we are making progress, tangible progress on SLS and MPCV. We've completed, and I don't want to read through the list, but we've completed water drop tests on Orion. We have actually completed risk reduction. We've had an industry day on the SLS. We have taken steps that will reduce the risk on the vehicle itself as we do it. We have transferred main engines over to the Stennis Space Center for testing after modification. So we are doing everything that we
So
can.
is this going to be
I will take it for the
$170
record.
million in savings? Is that what you're saying?
No, ma'am, but what I'm...
Well, that's what you're cutting out of this year's budget.
I will take one thing for the record. I think that you and I are disagreeing on what the FY12 appropriation amount really was. And I will take it for the record, but I think a check of the budget will show that the FY12 appropriation is actually in excess of what we submitted as needed based on the independent cost assessment. But I will take that for the record. I think the FY12 funding for SLS MPCV exceeded what we said we would need in the independent, substantiated by the independent cost assessment. I know that the FY12 budget was greatly reduced from what we said we would need in order to be able to close the gap with commercial crew. And so we're trying to get to the balance that you insist upon so that we have a commercial capability to supply the International Space Station and keep the gap from growing there.
Thank you.
We have not changed the delivery dates on SLS and MPCV. In fact, we have improved them somewhat by buying down risk with the tests the demonstrated activities that we've done today.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Administrator, as you can see, there's a lot of yellow flashing